I had begun keeping notes from certain visits to colleges and universities, and the kind of questions I got asked. Because inevitably, people wanted to talk about. If you're not, I mean, I'm writing a book. I'm generally, the previous two books were about work, and people wanted to talk about that, which is cool. But inevitably, people want to talk about their own work. What should I do? What do you think of my plan to do this, that, and the other thing? Which is cool, which is great. And I ended up just based on those questions, off the top of my head, dispensing advice, and I started taking notes on that and realized that a lot of these people were basically operating from the same false premises I was when I graduated from college 22 years ago. And that over the last 22 years, now I would argue like sort of even from high school, over the last 26 years, I think I've learned some things that I actually try to tell my kids, and that are kind of big picture things that I learned the hard way. And since their premises were wrong, I said, what are the premises that are wrong? And then I just made a massive list of them based on these scraps of paper I had, tucked away in pockets and things like that, and came up with, a bunch of them and just put them on a whiteboard, and then just ended up winnowing them down. For instance, there is no plan was clearly going to be in there, because that was like the biggest thing that I saw, where these people said, they had these carefully architected plans, and I just said, okay, God, I just kept telling them, guys, there is no plan. There is no plan, and then try to explain to them, it's like, try this experiment. Find someone who is doing something. Find someone, say, at least 15 years older than you, who's doing something interesting, who's doing something you admire, who's doing something that you think makes a contribution, something that you might want to do yourself, and ask that person how he or she got there. And I guarantee you, 99 times out of 100, they're going to say, it's a long story. Because they weren't operating off of a plan. They were basically making decisions, as Johnny does, for fundamental reasons, and living with the ambiguity that comes with that. But that's more effective and more interesting. So I knew that was going to be in there. And there were other things about the interplay within workplaces, and how there's certain people whom I've worked with who made me better, and certain people who made me worse, and how much more I preferred working with the first group than the second group, and how
that made you better, or
that made me better. Yeah,
right.
Like I much prefer to work with someone who makes me better than someone who makes me worse, and I work with both. And then I said, well, what do people think of me? I mean, am I someone who makes people better or makes people worse? And what can I do? Because if I'm making people better, then those are the kind of people who I want to work. I think about the people I want to work with again, and the people who I recommend to others, and the people who end up doing. And I say, well, what can I do to help make? And that became part of it. So there are all these other kind of things that basically just got, like any kind of writing exercise, any kind of creative exercise, they just get edited down and distilled. So those were out there too. But I also had this character in mind, because this character reminded of some of the people who would ask me these questions and these things. And I had this character very clearly in mind, and what kind of person he was, a little bit bumbling, generally well-intentioned. And I figured, okay, what would Johnny want to know? What would Johnny want to learn? What would be the most important things for Johnny to learn? And what might he learn if he had this kind of Yoda-like guide to help him navigate this world? Obviously we turn that. There's a very sturdy narrative tradition of young man making his way in the wilderness, guided by a wise and avuncular kind of figure who's almost always a man. And so we tried to play with that convention. I wanted to play with that convention by making her a woman, and making her not this kind of nurturing, wise person, but kind of smart ass and sort of dismissive of him and so forth.